Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It's Irene and
Seth. Hello.
Great. Think we're going? We're live?
We're live.
So my camera is not where I'm used to having it, so I'm just going to move it over here just a little bit.
Hi.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. We are here today to talk about SmartBody SmartMind. Registration is open as of now. I'm just gonna orient to all the things here that we've got. We've got the chat here that's popping, and let us know where you all are from. We've got some folk from Scotland, New York, the Netherlands. It looks like another person from Scotland, from Glasgow, and we've got some questions.
We do.
Yeah. So. First of all, just a quick one. If you're new to me, I'm Irene Lyon. I'm the founder of SmartBody SmartMind. Seth here is my husband, but also a colleague, and he is one of the co-teachers within SmartBody SmartMind. He's also a Somatic Experiencing practitioner. And registration is open for SBSM. So registration opens usually twice a year, and we run this in specific semesters, if we want to call them those, because we go together as a group. There's live support, there are live calls, and the field, it's a term that we use and we've learned from Kathy, the field, so the energetic of that container of everybody moving through at the same time is quite powerful. And this will be the 15th time we've run SmartBody SmartMind, and the collective just keeps getting stronger and stronger. So we have alumni who have been with us from the very beginning, over 7 years, and they keep coming back, they keep learning, they keep growing capacity. And again, for those new here, and we know we've got a lot of new folks watching us who've come in through the Healing Trauma video training. So if you've done that, thank you. The work that I have put out there is more than just quick tricks and tips and management strategies. The world right now of somatic healing, trauma healing, nervous system rewiring, all this stuff is quite new. And when I say new, I say within the last 40 years.
Yeah.
When Peter Levine really brought this stuff to the surface. So it's quite new. 40 years is quite young. And the good news is we're starting to figure out what really works and what doesn't. So this week, so the week today from the 13th of February through to next week, the 22nd of February, SmartBody SmartMind is open for registration to new members. We have a bunch of questions we're going to answer around the course, the curriculum, how it works. There's some specific questions around trauma healing and the nervous system, so we'll get to those. If you have succinct, short questions around the features of the course and you're here live, please pop them into the chat. My chat's there, but your chat is probably somewhere else on your screen. Pop into the chat, and one of our team members, Rebecca Roman, she's one of our practitioner colleagues, friends, and she moderates within SBSM. She will be there to answer those questions. So hello, Rebecca. Thank you for being with us. And should we just get started?
Sure.
All right. Let's see here. Too many screens. Okay. One thing I will start with, and maybe you can start with the first one, Seth, when we get you to read that. SBSM was created because when I was in private practice, and this is quite important, I was in private practice practicing something called the Feldenkrais method, Somatic Experiencing, and also a blend of work called Somatic Practice and Somatic Resilience and Regulation. There's a lot of somatic words in there.
Yeah.
And these are my trainings in the healing arts of trauma, the nervous system, rewiring the nervous system. My background before that was exercise science and biomedical science in my 20s and early 30s. So this is sort of my profession, my world. And I was in private practice, and it was very clear to me that it was not enough for a person who has survived and lived through abuse and trauma and just living in the West. Let's face it, there's a lot of traumas and abuses that are just cultural and condition based. It was very clear that these troubles that people had, it wasn't enough to see me or our colleagues for 1 hour a week. I had many people that saw me who had been seeing me for multiple years, like up to 5 years, every week, day in, day out. They were dedicated, and yes, they did good work, but it still wasn't enough. They had to be doing this work at home with themselves, integrating it. And so that was how I created these online programs back in 2011, 2012. So it's been a few years.
Yeah, I started just as homework really for your clients, right?
Yeah. I would make audio sessions via, CD.
Yeah.
You would burn them for me.
Yeah.
We'd put a label on them, and I'd hand a CD to my clients, and they would do the tracks on this CD as homework. Some of those pieces are within our online courses. The other thing is education. So I would hold seminars in my office with 30, 50. At once we had 100 people in a seminar, teaching them the biology of stress, why the nervous system is so important. And at that time, back in 2011, 2012, 2013, 14, so I guess that's 10 years ago now, it was really unknown. Nobody understood what trauma was. Nobody knew what their nervous system was. Nobody knew what somatic meant. And that was the start. So I also want to pop that in because this course is tried, it's tested, it has gone through a scientific investigation at a university. We haven't published the results yet, but we have seen results not only anecdotally with thousands of our members, and there have been thousands and thousands of people that have gone through SmartBody SmartMind, and in total through all my online programs, about 10,000 people. But we've also done this at a university level to really study a bit more rigorously how this work impacts a person and their well-being. So with that said, we'll get into the questions.
Okay.
Do you want to grab the first one?
Sure. Question is, Irene's Instagram post mentioned SBSM was more about learning than healing, but this is slightly concerning to me because I feel like my health issues, stage 4 adrenal failure and a cascade of other debilitating health issues coming from that, need immediate help. I'm under the care of great functional medicine doctors and on 100+ supplements a day, but it's very clear to me now that this is nervous system related, which is not my doctor's wheelhouse, which yes, that's the case. For most doctors, they don't understand this stuff. To be honest, I feel very close to death, and I would do anything to move in the right direction as soon as possible. I'd like to get the team's perspective on whether SBSM could be helpful for someone who needs somewhat urgent nervous system support. Is there a faster way out of this dysregulated state, or is the only path a slow unwinding of patterns and expansion of awareness? Great question. So do you want me to start off that one? Okay. So it's true that the learning is the foundation of the healing. And in that sense, what we really mean is that it starts by understanding what's happening inside you at a detailed level. Because when you understand your physiological processes better and what you're feeling, it can really bring more safety to your system. And that's the foundation of this work, is safety. The system won't organically start to heal and rewire, even with the best practices, if we don't have a better sense of like, okay, I'm not crazy, right? Like this makes sense, what I'm feeling, these sensations, these emotions, these thoughts, they all make sense. And I now understand it a little better. And then the learning directly translates to healing, often through the way we relearn how to learn. So many of us were taught in our education systems, it's about you mark off the check boxes and you learn the material and then you regurgitate it and you pass the test, right? And this way of working and healing and learning is very different. It's not such a goal-oriented process. It's about learning to be curious about ourselves, learning to be curious about our experiences, to sort of investigate them through this lens of compassionate curiosity is one way of saying it, which that shift alone starts to bring healing. So for example, say someone is feeling like a big intense rush of fight flight energy. A sympathetic charge is what we would call that. If they don't understand what's happening, usually what will go on is they'll get scared of it. The sensations will be really intense. They'll want it to go away, or they'll try to shut it down. And that reinforces the cycle of trauma and survival energy. When you understand it better and you can start to learn how to intervene with that process and to bring in somatic tools, which is what we teach in the course, then things can start to shift. But that shift starts with shifting the understanding of what's happening, meaning as when you can be compassionately curious about your experience rather than trying to shut it down or say go away. That alone gives the body permission to start to shift and change and do that rewiring that you're looking for. So it does start in learning. Now, it's not a fast process, and there's no way to fast track it that I know of. Unfortunately, this is just the case because the nervous system is so intricate and so complex. Do you want to say a little more about that? Or?
I think you covered it.
Yeah.
I would say what stood out is urgent nervous system support, and this person feels like the end might be near. And that's, we've had, I'm thinking of right now, Darla, Jen, Kay, and a few others. So maybe consider watching some of the stories from our alumni. I have had more than a handful of people say to me point blank, I would not be alive if it wasn't for SmartBody SmartMind. And I know that's a heavy a dose of testimony, and that might seem impossible, but these are people whom I've met, I've interviewed, and I'm still in touch with them. So for example, Darla Rioto, she was just on a panel, an alumni panel last Friday. Again, for those of you that are a bit skeptical and not sure, watch her progression. So we have her on Friday's panel, and then we have done 2 others where she shares her story more in depth. She had a tear in the sheath around her spinal cord due to a car accident. And that put her into a tailspin of pain and chronic illness and adrenal fatigue. And she was on her way to dying. And she fully says that. And this was the only thing that helped. And the thing is when we say this is the only thing that helped, it makes it sound like we gave her a magic spell and all of a sudden everything poof was better. And that's not the case. She did the work. She did the learning. She worked with herself. She learned to follow her impulse. She learned to grow sensation. And since she's healed her adrenal fatigue, she used to have neuropathy in her fingers due to the spine basically not being in a healthy state. That is back. She has feeling back. I asked her the other day, does she still have pain? Of course she still has pain. She has a spinal cord injury that cannot be surgically fixed. But when you watch her, she has life and vibrancy, and she's actively contributing to the world in ways that most people would say that never would have happened to her because she couldn't take any medication. It was too much for her system. I'm also thinking of a younger member. Her name is Jen Florence. I did an interview with her maybe, 2 years ago. If you just pop in Jen Florence and we can put it in the chat, she said to me, same thing, I wouldn't be here. It got to a point where her sensitivities were so high she couldn't eat anything. And then the other alum that's just ringing true in my head right now is Kay. Kay Aldred Louise. She's one of my senior students. She will be on a parenting panel later this week with us, but she has a few stories still on YouTube where she talks about, again, she probably wouldn't be here. And she is a testament, all these women, and it's not just women, men have done this work too, of course, but those are the ones that stand out right now. They have done the work. And here's the thing. You have to believe in your own healing. You have to believe that you deserve it. And this is the kind of the thing that you have to kind of jump over is when things have been so difficult for so long, the psyche is it's not so sure. And so you have to have faith and courage and commitment, but also know that the process might take some time. It also might be that once you start, you see shifts quite quickly because it's like restoring clean water to an ecosystem. If the water's been toxic for so long, you can put all the great organic vegetable seeds in there and it won't work, right? And so a lot of times people will find that when they start the program, there is this instant shift because they're feeding their system what it wants. And then sometimes it's not a rebound, but there will be moments where you might think you're going backwards, but you're not. You're actually growing capacity. And that capacity is allowing the old survival stress that makes us unwell to start to come up and out. So this is the other thing is, again, cannot stress listening to the alumni talks enough, because they speak about the importance of taking time, not rushing, and making this a lifelong process. So,
absolutely.
Okay. Next one. Hi, Irene. I'm very keen to start up this round, and I wonder if SBSM would help with panic attacks that I trigger myself due to fear of panic attacks.
Yeah.
The overarching answer is yes.
Absolutely.
If you do the work, right? So I'm going to say that again, like it's not enough to just purchase the course and say you have it. I know that seems kind of obvious, but there is this need to work with the fear and then work with the root of where that panic is coming from. Because it could be from so many things that we are not even aware of. This is something I struggled with over the last 5 years. It's not there anymore, but my system had panic attacks coming out of nowhere, and I had no memories, no nothing. And it took me some time, even with my level of skill and regulation, to trust that this basically a panic attack is a spike in sympathetic arousal, fight, flight, and it's usually very old. It took me time to trust, even knowing everything I knew, because it was still biological, right? It was still biological. So the overarching answer is yes. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's about learning to not fear the sensations of fear. And again, a lot of that comes through education, but it also comes through learning the different practices we teach, which are, some of them are about learning how to settle yourself. Like there's very clear somatic tools that you can start to use that will help your system start to come down a lot of the time. Now, different people have different responses to different lessons, so we can never say, do this and this will happen. But we have a variety of things that we teach, even in the first lab, which we call the modules labs, that will help a person learn, one, to understand what's happening and give them some tools to start to notice something else, maybe be able to come outside of that experience that's so intense a little bit, learn ways to make more space in the body. A lot of times the problem with panic attacks is that we tend to constrict. Like I said, like the sensations start, or even the thought of the panic attack starts, and that starts to produce these uncomfortable sensations, which then we constrict around, which makes it worse. So it's about learning the education and these tools that can give you some other options for how to work with those intense experiences. Yeah.
All right. Next question. I think that's the one. When you are starting out from a place of dysregulation and starting to do these techniques and practices, is this just managing dysregulation? So this is where it can be a bit murky. Yes, and also there's an and to this, because as we start to do, I don't like to call my stuff techniques. I like to be very specific. They're neurosensory exercises. What these will do is they will, if you haven't watched our healing trauma videos, the first one, I talk about the swimming pool and beach ball analogy. So as we do these neurosensory exercises, we build capacity of our system, our nervous system. As Seth was talking about, the ability to notice sensations and feel them without going into more fear. This building of capacity allows us to not only take out old stressors and old traumas, but it makes it so that anything new. So if you think about from this day forward, it's February 13th, every time going forward that you have a little pain, like today, just in time for the call, I nicked my shin on the dishwasher. I was rushing. and I was a little unaware, and I nicked myself, and my skin broke open and it hurt, right? But I didn't just keep pushing. I stopped, I felt it, I rubbed it, I took care of it, I cleaned it. I didn't let that little shock stress enter into my system. I worked with it. If we don't have the awareness to stop when current day stressors occur, and we feel them, the sensation, we breathe, we do whatever we need to do, that little stressor gets trapped in our swimming pool, in our body system. So when we're starting with dysregulation, and that's
all of us.
That's pretty much, I mean, we're in different, me and Seth and our team, those of us who have been doing this work for decades, we are in good regulation for the most part, but for many of you, you're not, and that's fine. That's just the way the world is. So yes, at the beginning, there might be this management of all these old stressors and survival responses, but you're doing it with a different kind of awareness, with the intention that we're building capacity, and eventually these big, I call them boulders within the system, these old traumas will start to come out. So the neurosensory exercises within the course, they service building capacity, and they service creating more space so that we can gain more regulation. And then you have here the second part to this question. You said yourself, Irene, that you were in freeze for 13 years when practicing techniques. So that's not true. I wasn't practicing any techniques. I didn't have any. So what's interesting is when I was in my freeze response, I didn't know I was in my freeze response really until recently. It's really the last 8 years that it really made sense how deeply in freeze, functional freeze I was. For some reason, I never was drawn to meditation. I was never drawn to breath work. I was never drawn to extreme techniques. I never went to healing retreats. I did a little bit of EFT tapping, but to be honest, it did virtually nothing because I wasn't getting under that freeze response. So for me, I actually didn't have what I've created, oddly enough. My sense is if I had had the things that I've put out there, my journey of healing would have been way different. I can't tell you what it would have looked like, but it would have been different. So when I was doing the work, in many ways, I was white knuckling it. I was having lots of somatic experiencing sessions, lots of touch sessions, lots of body work sessions that were probably too long. And I didn't have the capacity or the nuance to notice my sensations because I was in freeze. I wasn't working with the diaphragms. I wasn't working with the joints. I wasn't working with my kidney adrenals. It wasn't until I started to do the work of working with the stress organs, working with the kidney adrenals, the diaphragms, the layers, the gut, the joints. It was actually the joints. That's what catapulted me into realizing, oh my goodness, there's so much in there. So my story is a little different. But yes, at the beginning, it's like we're kind of rearranging the dysregulation, but in that we're also growing capacity, which grows regulation. Do you want to add anything to that, Seth?
Yeah, well, that it's important to understand there's a place for management. It's not like, when we learn how to manage our experience, again, that can bring more safety, which then grows our capacity. And then as we learn more of these practices and different ways of being with ourselves, we start to be able to do more than management. So the neurosensory exercises aren't designed to be necessarily definitely for management or definitely for really getting these traumas out of the system. They can all serve as kind of either. It depends where we're at in our journey and what our capacity is. A lot of the time, the first part of this process is starting to understand what our real capacity actually is. So for many people who have been in functional freeze, like Irene was, they think their capacity is way more than it actually is at a physiological level, right? Because functional freeze enables us to do so much from a place of survival without realizing it. So learning what our real capacity is often a huge step towards starting to do more than manage, right? Until we figure out this is how much I can actually engage with my inner process and not go into overwhelm, even at a subconscious level, then you start to learn, okay, I can do this much and then no more. And when you learn that genuine capacity, that's when you start to be able to do more than management and start to allow these things to truly start to shift. It's when the body starts to get those signals that like, oh, I'm being accurately understood. I'm being accurately paid attention to. Now I'll let this chunk of survival energy really come up and out and leave the system. So it's absolutely about way more than management, and management is part of it.
Okay. I'm going to get to this question and then I'm going to do some quick ones in the chat.
Sure. Yeah.
So is it suitable to do SBSM, so SmartBody SmartMind, alongside SE, Somatic Experiencing sessions? 100%.
For sure.
Yeah, 100%. If you can do that, 100%.
That's kind of the golden ticket if you can do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or any kind of deep equivalent where you're doing some form of work with a practitioner that is versed in the nervous system, in stress physiology. It could even be a really good acupuncturist or osteopath or craniosacral therapist or therapist that understands the body. It doesn't have to be SE. Anything else you want
to tie it back to the last thing about functional freeze, though, so absolutely that can be a great way to go. Also, though, understand that for a lot of people with early developmental trauma, they might not have the genuine capacity to really be in an hour-long session with another person, right? So again, that's something that may be a process of discovery. I know for myself, that's something that I had to learn, and I've seen that with other clients where it's like, oh, actually, we're just going to do 15 minutes of work today because that's how much I really have capacity for, right? So it absolutely can be a great thing to do both. But for lots of people, they will benefit from actually being able to work in the safety of their home, not having to show up and sort of manage themselves through a whole hour session with somebody. That might, not have to do too much work. So it can go either way. But yeah, that can be a really nice combination. Yeah.
If you can find someone who is okay doing a 15-minute session.
Yeah.
Like, and I, in all honesty, if someone doesn't understand why that might not be important, then you probably don't want to work with them.
Yeah.
And the model of that hour-long session or 30-minute session is out of really insurance billing and financial needs of the practitioner, because they have to make a living too. And it's tricky if they're just doing little bits of work with people. So, I can't stress enough how many times I was probably completely out to lunch in SE sessions where I was the client, and I had no idea, right? And that's just where we're at right now with the way the work is done. If can SBSM trigger flashbacks or anything that could cause severe dysregulation? I'm traveling for work a lot these months, and I want to make sure I'm regulated enough to do everything I have scheduled. So I'm going to be really honest. Don't hate me, but you won't get regulated in the next few months if you're dysregulated. So what I mean by that, I mean this with complete respect. This is where learning how to manage in an intelligent way will be key. Regulation is not something we just do with the exercise and we're regulated. It will take years and years if we are in severe dysregulation to get into regulation. That's just the truth. I haven't met anybody that's, have you?
No, it takes years.
It takes years.
No.
It took Seth about 7 to 8 years.
Yeah.
It took me longer, and because I was more functional, right? No offense.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
But I was in so much functional freeze. I was the traveling person. I was going to other countries to do my master's degree and flying off of mountains and doing all this crazy stuff. So I'm being really honest. What I want to say is the flashbacks, to me, flashbacks aren't bad if we reword them. They're memories, and we want to have capacity so when these memories come up, they don't overwhelm us and throw us into more fear and survival stress. The term flashback, I think, is where we have, this memory and it overtakes us and we panic and we break out in a sweat. That's not good, right? But SBSM will definitely open up the system so the capacity is bigger, and you might find that there is more activation being felt, more memories come up, more terror is being felt, more frustration is being felt, more anger is being felt, and that's actually all good. But this is where living in society, as you say, you have to work, you have to travel, you have to kind of pick your days where you're like, I'm going to go into a little functional freeze today.
Mm-hmm.
I have to override because I have to feed my kids.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go grocery shopping. I have to clean the house. I have a sick dog. I got to do these things. So we have to balance our work and when we have to sort of stay in our functional freeze, I think.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong to this, but it is something where we have to say, there will be moments where you're going to have to maybe put that functional freeze hat on. And then there'll be moments where you can really process and integrate and let this stuff come up and out.
Yeah. Also, it's important to note that we don't throw you into the deep end of the pool. The first few labs are really about education and learning what your resources are, developing basics like things we call following your impulse, orientation, different ways of actually soothing and coming out of the internal experience. I mean, so often that's what's needed first is there's too much going on in here to work with it. I need to learn how to actually calm my system, and I do need to learn to manage this a bit. And that's what the first few labs are more focused on. Rather than getting deep into the system, it's about learning how to be resourced, how to start to understand your capacity, how to start to learn how different impulses might bring you a greater sense of safety, how to orient to the external world and find safety there. So it's not about like a confrontational cathartic process that we're encouraging. It's really about building these levels of education, awareness, and tools such that you do grow your capacity to be able to handle the intense things that come with what you're calling a flashback.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah,
and in no place ever in this course or in any of our online courses do we ask you what your traumas are, what your struggles are. That might seem strange because again, this isn't therapy, right? This is a learning environment for you, and I am providing the curriculum and the catalysts for you to find your body in a very different. That's why it's called SmartBody SmartMind. We start with the body first and all the education around that. And it works really well. Now, if you want to share your story, your personal story in our introduction threads, or when there's a question that you have for the team, and maybe I'll take a second to explain this. When you join SBSM, you don't just, it isn't just here's the program, go have at her, see ya, never. There is support. We have 9 very experienced, professionally trained somatic practitioners from all walks of life. You can read their credentials on our site. Just look for Meet the Team. And we have a schedule where they are in our forums at least twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day, 7 days a week, answering questions. So every single lesson through the program has its own forum where you can ask questions about orienting or following impulse or kidney adrenals or working with anger. There's also a general question thread. If it doesn't fit in any of those boxes, maybe you have a question about flashbacks, you put that in there. Seth has Q&As that he does live once a week. So there's so many areas where you can get support. And this is unique. I don't know all the online courses out there for healing trauma, but I'm pretty certain that we are the only one that offers this level of support. That support is for you live when we're in session and 1 month after session ends. So this current round, we start in a couple of weeks. You will have moderation support into June.
Yeah.
And then as an SBSM member, when we run again, because I've seen some people ask how many times we run this year. Usually we run it twice a year. So again, I can't guarantee that, but the plan is to run it again in fall
Yeah.
of 2024. That's Northern Hemisphere, so kind of end of September, early October. So the moderation and the support does end mid-June. But we want you to swim a little bit on your own. We want you to learn and integrate. But then as alum, you get to come back free of charge and take part in the live sessions, asking questions on the forum. You can just have the content and keep repeating it over and over again. And that's the other thing that I'll mention is all the content, all the curriculum is for yours to keep. So we don't take it away from you ever. You can keep at it indefinitely. Well, until as long as we have the internet, which I think we'll have for a while.
Hopefully, yeah, 6 rounds.
And you can save everything to your computer too.
Yeah.
Someone had a question in the chat about thoughts on the safe and sound protocol. So this is something that Stephen Porges he created alongside other colleagues of ours, orthos in the more research setting. I have not experienced it myself. I know that it's been improved from what I've heard. What is the difference between my program, SBSM, and Safe and Sound Protocol? While I can't speak to the specific features and how it's different, what I do know is that our work, the SBSM work, is not a protocol. It isn't a, here's a list and do this. Here's a movement that you do for this specific thing. It's a much more, SBSM is much more conducive to how a baby would want to learn good attachment, good attunement, and good co-regulation and self-regulation in those first 3 years of life. Because we're not doing one specific thing, we're not working just with vocal toning or just with sound. We're working with that along with movement and education and a whole bunch of other stuff. So.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Huge difference. Huge difference. Just as someone who also is, my background is as a musician before I got into this work. I also, there is a whole page of the site which is original music that I've created, which is similar in its intention. Although, from what I understand, I had a client who did the Safe and Sound protocol, and so I know a bit about it. And it sounds like it can be very helpful for some people at helping to stimulate that ventral vagal system, which can bring an increased sense of safety. It's genuinely, from the way my client described it. Can you
define ventral vagal?
Sure. So ventral vagal is a part of our parasympathetic system that essentially allows us to find safety in co-regulation through relationship. So if we're having a nice conversation with someone that feels safe, our system starts to feel settled. That's the ventral vagal system sparking up. So the Safe and Sound protocol, from how my client described it, was about supporting that, ability of getting that soothing, that settling, that safety through, which is why it's called Safe and Sound, I believe, right? Through stimulating the ventral vagal. So we also do that, and a whole lot of other stuff. We're working with the sympathetic system, the fight-flight charges directly. It's not just about settling and soothing. Of course, that's important, like we said, but it's also about learning to get those dragons starting to move and coming up and out of the system. So, the Safe and Sound protocol is kind of like one specific thing for one purpose, and SBSM is like everything, the whole enchilada. It's a very different, you can't really compare them. So.
No, and it doesn't mean one is better or worse.
No.
It's just that I know that because of what's gone into SBSM, the diversity of my background with the Feldenkrais work, SE, and then all the early trauma pieces through our teachers, Kathy Kane and Steve Terrell, plus my artful way of blending them together and teaching. This covers not just working with our survival, but also co-regulation, also anger and healthy aggression, also shame, healthy shame, toxic shame, also relational, because some people ask us our opinions on, say, internal family systems and parts work. And I have colleagues who swear by that and do it. And I have no doubt that it is amazing work, no doubt. And that is something for people to explore if they wish. But we've also seen people who've gone through SBSM, they massively heal their relational traumas, surgical trauma. It's
accidents.
It's not because it's not that this is like some, again, magic bullet. It's the process And the theories and the practices are from many different lanes. It's not just one thing. And I know that some of the things that I see on, say, social media, a lot of the heavy nervous system influencers who, in my opinion, don't have a lot of background and training and work clinically, they will say things like the way to get out of activation or the way to regulate your nervous system is through connection. Well, that's maybe true for some, but for others, that's terrifying. So why the heck would you want to force connection or force sound or force touch if that person isn't ready for that? Right? Just like you cannot force your baby to love you. You know, you can't force that little one to love you as a parent. Like, you have to do it through attunement and connection and showing them that you're there for them. And so I get a little heated with some of these things because it is not basic.
It's not simple.
Our systems, not in the current paradigm of humanity where we've all been raised differently. Now, if we were all raised exactly the same, even if it wasn't the best raising, but it was all the same, it would be a lot simpler. But we've all had different histories and different attachment styles and all the things. Yeah. Someone here asked about migraines, which I know a lot of people struggle from headaches. And I want to pop in so that we cover this, what's called syndromes. So syndromal representation, that word was sort of popularized by Peter Levine, in the 90s, maybe 80s, to represent people that have these chronic ailments like migraines, severe PMS, IBS, Crohn's, autoimmune, panic disorder, and anxiety disorders, Raynaud's, RDS, like severe chronic illness troubles. And the question here is, what parts of SBSM would be helpful for migraines? Because you say, I understand migraines is a mixed state of the nervous system. That's right. It's where there is high level fight flight, so sympathetic activation. Something's getting me, or I got to flee, or it's that fear response, along with the freeze, the shutdown. And so when you have a system, and this is where most and many of us live, which is why these illnesses are so rampant right now in society, you have this gas on and brake on at the same time, and the system breaks down. So there is no one part of SBSM that is just helpful for this. The whole curriculum is in service of restoring regulation and capacity to your system so that we get out of fight, flight, freeze, and we come into better harmony with them, because we still need them. We need to have fight, flight, freeze when we need them, but we want to be living more in that ventral vagal that Seth just mentioned, and the rest digest of the parasympathetic. So we've had many people who have healed migraines and autoimmune and gut problems and chronic pain via not doing one exercise in SBSM, but applying the whole curriculum over time consistently, and then making it a lifestyle and having that integrate into their system. So I just wanted to kind of get that one covered, because this is the most common question.
Yeah. Will SBSM help with this?
And what part do I need to do? You have to do the whole part.
The whole thing. The whole enchilada.
It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
Someone said, I've bought the 21 days, but I have yet to start. Should I start it now and drop it, or do SBSM in a couple of weeks? Yeah, start the 21 day now.
Yeah, get started.
There's no reason you can't start. There's also a question here. So this is like two birds here. A lot of confusion, 21 days versus SBSM. What's the difference? So first of all, for reference, there's a very long and comprehensive FAQ on the SBSM registration site. It's the first question. What is the difference between the two? The difference is SBSM was the first course. That's the one that has all the things that I wish everybody knew. It's not everything, but it's very comprehensive. The 21 days was created so that if someone found the work, my stuff, when we weren't in active SBSM registration, they could start the 21 days and do something. A lot of people, because their dysregulation isn't as severe and their early trauma isn't as severe, they get massive benefits from the 21-day alone.
Yeah.
And I've also found that those who have massive benefits with 21-day, they're a little younger and they're usually in good relationships.
Yeah.
They like their jobs. They're not stressed financially. They're just already, they have more of Maslow's hierarchy of needs met. So you can get so much from the 21 days when you have those basic needs met. But from my experience, we need to work with the stress organs, anger, healthy aggression, toxic shame, and we need that extra level of support, and that's what SBSM is.
Yeah, this is especially true if, like most people, you have early developmental trauma and you're maybe a little bit older, a little bit further down the path of dysregulation, maybe you have these syndromes that we're talking about, then yes, you're going to want the more in-depth work that we provide in SBSM. Yeah. Also, just an FYI, if you do join 21 days, I saw a question about this, you get the price of that deducted from SBSM when you join, and the person was asking where they could find that. Just to know, it's in your email. If you're a 21-day member, you'll be getting emails during this registration period. There's a special link in that email for you, which gives you that discounted price. So.
Any alumni who have had benefits from healing thyroid problems, 100%. Yep. 100%.
Absolutely.
Most hormone problems, we've seen people shift. We've even seen people who are type 1 diabetic be able to lower their insulin dosage, which shows a lot, because there's a lot of talk right now out there that basically is like there's no such thing as an autoimmune illness. Why would the body attack itself? What it's showing is an asking or a begging of something to change. And Sandra is the alumni. If you look up Sandra in just my name, you should be able to find it quite easily. She speaks about her journey with diabetes and insulin resistance and getting into this work. And she found that when she started to engage more in that ventral vagal of the parasympathetic that Seth just mentioned, she noticed her blood glucose completely shift and change, right? So again, these metabolic functions in our body, I have to remind everybody who's new here, they are governed by the autonomic nervous system. The digestion, the immune, the hormone, the cardiovascular, the relational, the cognitive ability, all of this is governed by how our autonomic nervous system and the peripheral nerves work. That would be the other thing I'll mention, and then we can maybe get to the next one here, is the uniqueness again of SBSM is we have movement lessons that are Feldenkrais based. And the reason why that's so important is when we're little, the way we explore the world and learn about ourselves, it's not through deep thought. It's not even through talking, it is the connection. It's through our movement. It's through how we explore our body, how we learn to crawl and bend our spine and find our feet and our hands and the dexterity that is this nervous system of ours. And when we're stuck in dysregulation, we're a little jerky. We know this through people who have neurodegenerative diseases. They're spastic. They have problems with smooth movement. And so the other benefit of SBSM is you're getting amazing Feldenkraisian principle-based lessons. And I know that might mean nothing to a lot of people, but it's reteaching you how to sense how your body moves and how to change it so that you improve your movement and your tone of movement and your quality of movement and your awareness of movement. If we don't change the way in which our body parts relate in relationship to the environment, we can do all the amazing sensing, tapping, trauma release in the world. But if we're still rigid in our muscles and we don't know where our feet are in relationship to our head, we won't get a full shift and change. So the more I do this work, and this has become more clear to me just in the last 6 months, that Feldenkraisian component, in my opinion, is the magic glue that binds all this stuff together. And there's not much out there that combines all of that together, unless, of course, you worked with a practitioner who has all those skills in one. And we do exist, but again, it's not common to find someone like that, and to work with someone like that years and years on end is just not feasible for most of us.
Can I add one piece about that?
Yeah.
Another really sometimes surprising thing about the Feldenkrais work, which is, like Irene says, about relearning how to move. And that often starts with discovering habitual patterns of movement. What's fascinating is so often those habitual patterns of movement are themselves tied to unresolved survival states in the nervous system. So you may not think that you could necessarily be doing trauma work by paying attention to how you move your wrist and hand necessarily. You would be flabbergasted at what can show up when you start to change and challenge existing movement patterns. It can just whoosh. So that's why these Feldenkraisian, more intense Feldenkraisian lessons are towards the end of the program, because we build a lot of time building that education and the different practices, ways of settling, ways to come out of the internal experience, ways to understand it, ways to work with it, such that when you get into these really refined movement practices, you're prepared to work with the energies that sometimes come up.
Yeah, what's often not known, and even high-level alternative medical people don't know this, is things like tics, Tourette's, it's another way to say it. There's even some speculation, and this was first introduced to me via Peter Levine, things like Parkinson's, restless leg, spasmodic, I think it's dysphonia, like where the voice is really hard to speak. These are, from what we've seen, stored survival responses in the motor cells. Yeah. So in the muscle movements. And so a lot, torticollis is another, where the head is crooked in a certain position. I've worked with people where they think these things are a disease. They're not for a lot of the time. They are stored traumatic procedural memories. I've done tons of videos on this, but the system is wanting to produce a movement, but it's stuck in a trauma response. It's stuck in a fear response. Frozen shoulder, which so many people, especially women, struggle with, is a result of their arms being tied down, not necessarily through physical attack or sexual abuse, but it could be surgical trauma where you're having to stay really still because of a dental thing, and you're not even strapped down, but you know you have to stay still, but you want to just break your arms free and hit that dentist, So all these times that we've suppressed that desire to hit, scream, cry, kick, run, sneeze, all the times we hold in our bodily impulses, this creates tension in the system in the form of stored survival stress, which people would often call stored trauma. So again, movement is so important, and getting good at sensing these restrictions in your body. It's not enough to just go and get it massaged out. It might feel good for a day or two, but and again, this is how I got into the SE work. It wasn't enough to just move the muscle. It had to get to that core nervous system level.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question that was submitted: does SBSM qualify me for continuing education hours? I'm a licensed massage therapist, so I'm not registered with any body. And what I have found, because in the past I've needed to prove continuing education credits for my Feldenkrais certification, sometimes there's an honor system where if you can prove that what you've done is comprehensive, we do offer, if you want a certificate that says the amount of hours and the course in my name, we will provide that to you. But then you have to take that certificate and submit it to your registered body, and then they either approve it or don't. It's wonderful continuing education, though. It'll completely change how you practice.
Well, there's another question in the chat about is this good for practitioners?
Oh, yeah.
So it'd be good to just hit that real quick. That absolutely, it's not teaching you to be a practitioner, but if you already are a practitioner, the amount that you will learn and discover about yourself, first and foremost, will vastly change for most practitioners how you work with your client, and also may give you tons of different ideas of different tools and understanding how to understand your clients, different ways of working with them. So it's not designed to be a practitioner training, but it absolutely is beneficial. Yeah.
I haven't met anybody who doesn't, like anybody that works with people, they will say this has shifted everything in how I work with people, and not just people in the health and healing world, people that run companies,
teachers,
obviously parents,
people that work in jails.
Yeah, we've had people that have worked in prisons and in drug and rehab facilities. There's nothing. This will inform you in no matter what you do. Even if you are a monk living in the middle of nowhere, it will connect you to a deeper element of yourself and to the environment. Are we assigned a buddy partner throughout the program? No. And this is very intentional. I actually did a video, how to become more accountable with your health practices. Watch that. We don't do accountability buddies. We want you to be accountable to yourself, but to also, be engaged with the support within the program. So if you need help, and I know that a lot of people still don't ask questions, and they should, use our services, use our faculty, ask questions. And, even reading through comments from other peers. I was actually going to make this like a homework assignment this round, is for every lesson that you do, make a point to read at least one question around that lesson that isn't yours, so that you learn other people's perspectives. Because what's one person's trigger is another person's nothing. And we have gotten to this point where we just assume everyone believes this and not that. And we're so diverse that we need to understand the way that humans think and see. And one way to do that is to read the comments and the questions within the forum. And that's one way to learn so much.
Yeah.
Live calls during the 12-week program. My training calls are live on Tuesdays. This round, there will be some that are pre-recorded. And then Seth's Q&As are on Thursdays.
Yeah. Every week except for when we have a break week.
Right.
Yeah.
And all the material is lifetime access. So
yeah. And again, you can download everything in the site. We often suggest people to get an external hard drive if they want, and you can download everything, so it's all available offline as well. Yeah.
You want to tackle this one?
Is SBSM neurodiverse friendly? ASD, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, etc., especially for working memory issues and extreme difficulty in automating new habits, remembering what you've just watched, etc. Absolutely it is. And we, from the lens of somatic nervous system based healing, everything that you just talked about there, every label is just dysregulation. This is unresolved trauma and survival energy showing up in different ways. ADHD, like one, just as a quick example, that's a very difficult time focusing, right? You can't stay focused on one thing. That's a sympathetic fight-flight response that's very highly charged in the system, saying danger, danger, danger. How are you going to focus on one thing when your nervous system is saying there's a threat here, there's a threat here, there's a threat here, there's a threat here? But the thing is, the threat is in here. So absolutely, it's supportive of all of those different conditions, because they're all the same thing. They're all just different forms of nervous system dysregulation.
I really like the fact that you've asked this question, Nikki, because I've never heard of this, dyscalculia, and I knew it had to do with math because of calculus.
You got that.
So here's what's interesting, and I want to say with respect, because I know for many of us, getting a diagnosis is helpful.
For sure.
Watch our alumni talk with Selden Bailuni. She talks about being diagnosed with lupus when she was in her 40s, and she's still in her 40s, I think, and how that was monumental because it made her understand, but it gave her family system something to grasp onto, so that they're like, okay, she's not cuckoo. There's an actual problem here. And her stuff stemmed from abuse when she was really, really young, and nobody knew this happened. And she's healed. Like, she doesn't have lupus anymore. All the markers are gone for inflammatory situations in the body. I was someone who struggled all my school time, basically straight C minuses. If I was lucky, I would get a C+ in elementary school. They thought I was learning disabled, so they took me to all the things, ear testing, brain testing, and of course they found nothing wrong. And up until recently, I've just had trouble with numbers, but I've gotten better at it through playing crib with Seth. And it's like when we play this game, there is an activation in my system But I just go into it. I'm like, there's no reason I can't do this because I did so well at calculus and geometry, right? And so when I was growing up, there were no labels. I would have been classified with all those things. But I know now, in uncovering my functional freeze, I was just shut down. So my higher brain could not figure out this stuff. That's all it was.
Yeah.
And for me personally, we are all diverse. We're all unique. As humans, I believe in a soul. We have different journeys. We have our spirit is so big, and we've really, I think, done a disservice to humans by giving them these labels. Everyone is special. Everyone is diverse, and so many of us are still living with deep dysregulation. And as that regulation starts to shift, I think there's no coincidence that my ability and interest in playing with numbers has gotten easier in the last year as I've gotten really out of functional freeze.
Yeah.
That's not a coincidence. So I'm really glad you asked that question, because I'm like, that's what I technically had. Yeah. But our brains are meant to be smart. Again, smart body, smart mind. Our brains are meant to process complex things. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to be a math genius and everyone's going to be a music genius. Everyone has their unique traits, I believe, soul-wise. But when we're dysregulated, we don't know what that is. So
very hard to discover your inner genius when inside you're struggling to survive.
Yeah.
Right.
We kind of already answered this, but do you want to just read that out for the sake of reading out?
In one of her YouTube videos, I heard Irene say, "Don't fear fear. How can one say or convey this to one's heavily dysregulated autonomic nervous system in a way that the system starts to believe it?" So yeah, we talked about this, learning to not fear the sensations of fear. And again, it starts with education. It starts with understanding, the reason my heart is racing is because I am having a sympathetic survival response mount in my system. And now I know this tool that I can use to help that heart rate calm down and to resource myself. The reason my throat is getting tight is because that is my system starting to clamp down and try to constrict around the energy. And I realize, maybe I can just soften my throat a little bit and allow some of that energy to move through, et cetera, et cetera. So it starts with education, and then with learning these different practices, ways of intervening with the body.
Someone said, it's weird that commercials are popping up during the live. I'm sorry. We tried. I couldn't start the live without doing that. I've never seen that before. So that wasn't me wanting to do that. That's Google wanting money.
Yeah. If you have YouTube Premium, which again is Google wanting money, you won't get the ads. So that's the only way around it.
Yeah, that was a first. SBSM also a great fit for practitioners. I know already answered this, but I'm a naturopath specializing in working with chronic fatigue. And then in this year, I might start my SE training. So 100%. I have two very good friends who are naturopathic doctors. I've done 2 interviews actually with them, Chelsea and Mason. That's their names. So check those interviews out. And one of our 21-day members, actually, her name is Kim. We just released a clip of hers where she shares how she went through a spontaneous organic trauma release. It's an audio only clip, but she just graduated from medical school. And that made me so excited that this young 20-year-old is doing this work. The only way that this information will get into the institutions, it's not from the top down.
No.
It's from people like you getting this work into your bodies. So this is the difference between, say this work and a doctor learning a new technique for an appendectomy, right? Like you don't need to do your own appendectomy to get good at doing an appendectomy. You just know the drill and you do it. This work, working with people who have chronic fatigue, chronic pain, sickness, autoimmune, oddly, from my experience, it is hard to do this work with your clients or patients if you haven't done this work on yourself yet. And the reason why is the word attunement. The more attuned you are to yourself, the more you can tune into your own biology, the more that biology tells you exactly what you need to do with your patients. That's it.
And this is one of the things they don't teach in the SE training. They never, at least in my training, And I've done a lot of training, been to many master classes with Peter. This was never said explicitly. And it's the truth that the way that you do this work well as an SE practitioner is by listening to your own body. Because your body tells you what you need to know about what's happening in the client's body.
You're right, it was never taught.
It was never taught explicitly, which is crazy because it's the foundation of how you do the work well. So absolutely, we've had SE trainers tell us, we can tell the students that come in who've done SBSM because they're light years ahead of everyone else. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think, it's not to hit on that training, but I want to say this, that training is a first beginning. It's the beginning.
Yeah.
Right? Just like I have no doubt, and I'd love time to study medical history, I have no doubt that the first medical schools taught some pretty bad stuff, and there might still be some, obviously, that are doing that. But we're in an evolution right now with this work. It's still quite embryonic, in my opinion. It's just beginning. And like I'm thinking about true stories. This happened over and over and over again when I was assisting in SE trainings. One of the things that would often happen is you'd sit in a triad, so 3 students and 1 assistant, and I was always that assistant in those situations. And the exercise would be to practice something, let's say orienting. And 100 times out of 100 times, the session or the practice would go sideways when the person being the practitioner didn't follow their own internal impulse and they stuck with the exercise. Now, of course, we want to stay within the zone of orienting, have that in the field, but they would follow it to the T. But then in the debrief, I'd be like, so what happened? And they're like, well, I had this impulse to actually ask them about their jacket, like that cool jacket that they were wearing, but I didn't. And I got them to look around the room. So what's happening right there? That student who's practicing to be a practitioner had an impulse. They saw that person's, or maybe, the cool pink shirt, right? Like, oh, look at that shirt. Like, yeah, I really like it. It's blah, blah, blah. That's orienting. And so this is that natural, organic interchange with being a human with another human in service of helping that human become more regulated. And we've had SBSMers who have gone into the SE training and they've said, I'm thinking of Naomi Galinsky, and she's written this for us. She's like, I knew exactly what to do. Like, I already knew how to work with people when I went into my SE training from doing SBSM for a handful of years. So hopefully that helps. Oops, sorry. So question that's specific to neck tension. Someone said, I have tight neck and dizziness. Could this come from anxiety? People online claim my neck curve is out of position. So tension in the neck, dizziness, there's so many things that could occur here. Again, I don't know your history. I'm going to talk to say my history. I have had lots of accidents, shock traumas, whiplashes. But when I experienced my survival stress coming out in the form of anxiety and panic, it had very little to do with my shock traumas to my neck and spine. So sometimes it could be connected and sometimes they're not connected at all. But tight neck, dizziness, let's say someone's been in a car accident and they thought they were going to die in that car accident and they go into shock to brace in that accident, then yeah, that neck tightness and dizziness, maybe there was a concussion, could totally be due to that survival stress. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Dizziness is often kind of in the syndromal camp of things, in that it's not just one thing. It's usually caused by a combination of activation and freeze working together, which brings that discombobulation into the system. So it may, be connected to anxiety, or it may be a little bit more complex than that. Yeah.
Okay, see, we've got 2 things going on here. Start at the bottom. I'm going to do that one.
Oh, wow. I'm a highly sensitive person, an Army veteran. Of course, being in the military, functional freeze is a normalized way of life,
Mm-hmm.
coupled with perpetual unprocessed grief, losing friends, moving constantly. Will this help?
Yes.
It certainly can. I mean,
Yeah.
oh my gosh. I mean, it's coming out of functional freeze is something that so many of us have to do from being in so many different situations. I mean, just life in industrialized society will put someone into functional freeze as a kid and a baby 9 times out of 10, unless the parents are really, really on it and regulated themselves and trauma informed and understand all this stuff. But being in the military, oh my gosh, absolutely, that takes it to a whole nother level of what you have to repress in order to function. I would imagine. I'm not a veteran, but I would imagine. So absolutely, it'll be about, your process will be unique, but it'll be again about learning to understand what's happening inside of you, and then using these neurosensory exercises and the support and et cetera to start to get into the system. So much starts to change and thaw, like the grief you're talking about, for example. That's very often stuck in the lungs, in what we call this diaphragm, the shoulder diaphragm. As you start to maybe do one of the diaphragm lessons and you've got some good foundations, yeah, that grief may come up and out. And that's welcome. It's about welcoming that experience. There's many ways in which the system will thaw and allow this stuff to come up and out. It starts with that fundamental process of curiosity and wanting to, right? I want to meet myself here. I want to discover what's inside. So if you want to, yes, it will help.
One of my good colleagues was in my Feldenkrais training, and he was also military. He was a sniper, one of the best sharpshooters in the Army during his time, and he was amazing at Feldenkrais because he had such delicate touch, and he could coordinate his breath because of the shooting, right? But then he decided to go into the SE training. And I remember when a lecture was happening on functional freeze, and he just went up to our teacher and he looked at him. He's like, "So functional freeze, hey?" And my teacher looked at my military friend and he's like, "Yeah, functional freeze." Because this friend of mine was just, such a wonderful, wonderful human and so good. But he was completely frozen, as was I at that time. And, it's in hindsight, it's funny to, we laugh about it, but having him and another friend and hearing the drills and the training that you guys go through in military, you are having to override to do your job. And not, this falls in for nurses, ER doctors, first responders, anyone, social workers, where you are in a high stress position and you are there to help. You have got to squash your desire to scream, to look away, to, vomit if you see something that you don't want to see. Those things are stuck in the system. And I know that from growing up in a medical environment, seeing things that were not nice and not good. That stuff gets held in because you have to do your job.
Yeah.
So how do you, know, okay, that was the service I gave to my country. I'm glad I did that. And now I need to work on the healing from that. All right. Anything else?
No.
Okay. Is there a prerequisite course before SBSM? No. The only prerequisite is your desire to learn. And guide yourself through. While we are there to guide and give you structure, you still have to show up. You still have to show up and quote unquote brush your teeth every day and tie up your shoelaces and clean. I'm saying this is a metaphor, right? Like you still have to engage with the work.
Yeah. Also asked how many hours a week. Just go to the FAQs on the site. There's a detailed answer that breaks down all the hourly and requirements, but there's no requirements is the thing. Like I said, the baseline of this work is discovering your capacity, which means discovering your pace. So we have a suggested outline and a suggested curriculum. That's all it is a suggestion. We really over and over and over again, you'll get tired of hearing this from us. You need to go at your own pace, and you first need to discover what that is in order for the work to be very effective. And again, that often involves relearning how to learn. So if you are someone who has the capacity to go in and follow the curriculum outline exactly, you'll find out the hourly requirements for that. But there's people who will spend the whole program on like the first few lessons, because this is the thing, you have it for life. We run it in these live rounds, so you have live support and live engagement, but you have the material forever. So there's no, I can't say exactly what the hours per week will be for you, because it depends on your capacity and your pace.
Rebecca did address this, but I know there's going to be others that are falling into this boat. So someone asked, I damaged my nervous system 3 years ago from bad SE practice, so bad somatic experiencing practice, and pushing too hard too early. I'm still healing slowly. Is there any point in signing up for SBSM while being in this state? So yeah, Rebecca said, of course, if you have a safe living environment, you can start, and it's self-paced. So I will add that, like, this is for those who are living in a stable environment. That being said, I know folk who have started this course while living in their car and homeless.
It's true.
So, or bedridden. So it all depends on your circumstance, what you know you can do, what your capacity is. So first of all, I'm sorry that you had this bad SE experience. I too had a bad SE experience.
You'd be amazed how often we hear that.
And I talk about that in my longer talk with you. We did it last year.
Yeah.
And it was with Peter Levine. Too much occurred. There was a misattunement. And perhaps that was the learning I had to get, but I think it happens too often.
Yeah.
So again, this comes back to what Seth said about how sometimes we just need 5 minutes of work.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of SBSM, is you could do even less than that.
Yeah.
You push play on the audio and you maybe wash the dishes.
Yeah.
Right? There's ways to titrate this information so that it comes in at a slower pace. And that's the beauty, is you can literally take your computer and say, no more today, and go for a walk, right? And not think about it.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely. Go up. As we become more regulated through SBSM, how does this help with engaging with family? Great. So yes, very often, of course, for many of us, our trauma comes from our family system. There's a lot of ways in which that can play out. Some systems stay dysfunctional, other systems evolve and heal, maybe get a little bit better. What I will say is that if you come from a family system that was sort of the source of your trauma, like me, there may be a period of time where it's important to create a safe container for yourself. And that may mean setting boundaries and limiting contact with your family. I have an article on this on my website called Sometimes We Have to Break Up with Our Family, that also covers the more complex situation of people who are dysregulated and yet are forced to still be living with their family due to financial circumstances. It covers what to do if you're in that situation. But essentially what happens, which is amazing with this work, is as you start to regulate yourself, basically one of two things will happen, or maybe both. Oftentimes the family system will rebel or revolt. Members of your family may start to sense the change in you. It can even be unconscious and may get more aggressive, or they may try to drag you back into dysfunctional patterns that you're freeing yourself from, because you're part of a system that, as it is, depends on your dysregulation to exist. When you choose to say, no, I'm not going to do that anymore, I'm going to heal myself, you disrupt that system. So there may be an initial period where people sort of revolt and they get angry, they try to drag you back in, and that's where it can be really important to set boundaries and limit contact. Now, the other thing that happens, and this may happen later, is that as you grow your regulation, that ripples out into the family system in this very kind of peculiar, invisible way that's very real. We see it again and again and hear it from our alumni over and over with their kids, their parents, their siblings. When we regulate ourselves, that impacts the familial field, and it starts to change our relations. Now, some of them may not be down with that, like I said, they go further afield. But lots of times, like this is what happened with my own father, somehow he started being softer and more available for communicating about emotions, like which never ever happened, right? So it's this amazing synchronistic thing that can happen where the regulation we build within ourselves ripples out to the systems that we interact with.
It's true. It's good. It's so true. Okay, I saw a recent video of Irene sharing the story of her phone slipping out of her hands and how she used rage to move survival energy up and out. I'm curious, using techniques and tools to shift and move survival energy out as a way and not bypassing. So great question. So recently I've posted a few more stories of organic trauma releases. So one could say that was one with Joe Martino, one of our senior students, and one with Kim, who I mentioned a little while ago, who had an organic trauma release at night while in bed. And what one might think of is, okay, what's the technique to do that? And in that moment when I was with Seth, in this story that we shared, there's no technique I'm thinking about. What came out of my body was internal, and it was split-second sensation that led me to move the anger and rage out. What went wrong in that story was I was trying to apply a technique. Remember, we were sitting on that stoop and I'm like, okay, orient, feel. I was touching, I was working with my diaphragms. I was connecting with my husband, who's totally safe. We're in this beautiful alleyway, in Europe, and nothing was working. And then we walked a bit, and then I kept feeling this sympathetic arousal. And then out of the blue, this massive rage came out, and you had the intuition. So again, Seth is feeling from his body to put his arm up, and I just grabbed it and shook the heck out of it and pushed him.
Pushed me down the alleyway. Yeah,
and I didn't push you down the alleyway. I pushed you into the wall.
Oh, that's right.
And I wanted to scream, but I didn't scream because I didn't want anybody to freak out and think someone was being attacked. But in that example, thank you for asking this question. The techniques didn't help me.
It was the impulse.
And that is the part that is so difficult to convey when we haven't yet done this work, if we haven't learned how to feel our impulses. It's so easy to start. It starts with, when do you have to go to the bathroom? When are you thirsty? When are you tired? Can you feel the pressure in your bladder, in your rectum? Are you holding in gas? Are you holding in sneezes? Like these are the entry points into listening to your sensations and following your biological impulses. Because if we can't do that, we sure as hell are not going to be able to do an organic trauma release, because that requires more energy and more complexity. So start with these basic things. Even, you're cold, don't stay cold, warm up, right? You're hot, you're sweating, loosen some clothes. Right? Cool yourself down. That temperature regulation is another entryway in to working with your autonomic nervous system.
So here's one that's just again points out the difference between what we're offering and what you see out there, for the most part. Question: I just ordered a vagus nerve stimulator. Do you think they're any good? This one goes around your neck. So. First, let's talk about vagus nerve stimulator. There's two branches to the vagus nerve, ventral vagal and dorsal vagal. They both do entirely different things. So is this stimulating your dorsal vagal branch, or is it stimulating your ventral vagal branch? Do the people who made it even understand the difference? Because those two branches are responsible for entirely different functions. These are the types of subtleties and nuance that you will learn in SBSM, and are absolutely crucial to understanding if you actually want to heal. Now, when I see vagus nerve stimulator, most likely what they're saying is it's probably designed to stimulate the ventral vagal branch, since that's what people are associating with safety. However, for many people, the ventral vagal branch may not be something they even have access to sensing. Social engagement may be terrifying. So if you stimulate it directly, it may do nothing. It may help soothe. Who knows? But what the point is, if you have dysregulation, just stimulating your vagus nerve will do nothing. You have to learn to understand, to work with the survival energy that's underneath. It's trauma work is so often much more about working with the sympathetic system. Now, it's important to learn to find the resource and safety that the ventral vagal social engagement system provides. That's a resource, that's important. But we may not even have access to it until we get some of the rage out that wanted to fight or run away, right? So, I mean, I can't say for sure if it will help. It's possible it'll be soothing and settling, but there's a huge difference between soothing and settling and healing. When we heal trauma, it's often, for a time, the opposite of soothing and settling. It's about developing the capacity to engage with all within us that is not settled, that is pissed, that is terrified. That's much more what actual healing looks like, is learning to encounter those more intense things. And again, not diving into the pool of that either. Building the pool, building the capacity, building the resources, building the tools such that you can do that safely. But again, this is what we see over and over again. Nervous system hack, vagus nerve stimulator, oming techniques, whatever it is. There's these little boxes that try to take little bite-sized pieces out of this thing that is a vast tapestry that needs to be understood in all its nuance in order to really bring back regulation.
Mm-hmm. All right. You want to tackle this one?
I'm wondering how systemic and racialized trauma is addressed in this program. Seems to be something missing in a lot of the SE trainings, and I'm looking for training that raises awareness regarding this. That's a great question. It's certainly a very real thing. I guess maybe part of the reason you're seeing not a lot of awareness about that in the SE training is because from a nervous system perspective, what we would say systemic racialized trauma is sort of, it could be called inescapable attack, chronic stress, chronic strain. That's very real for sure. And a baby in a nice white suburban home who's not being attuned to and is surrounded by chronically stressed parents, it's the same effect on their nervous system as systemic racialized trauma is on a person of color. And I'm sorry if that sounds insensitive, but it's just the truth. Our nervous system doesn't have color. It doesn't have race. So we have all these different kinds of stresses and strains on our system that come from all sorts of places. And the effect at a nervous system level of being systemically discriminated against, and we have had plenty of clients and people in the program who that's the case, but the effect at the physiological level is the same as being chronically stressed or oppressed in any other way. So,
yeah, and I want to also say, as someone whom is half, many of you don't know that because I look more white, but my mother is from the Philippines, and she's my real biological mother. And when I think about growing up in that family system, there was no this is a biracial family. She was just my mom. My dad was just my dad, and there was no talk of it. And I had the culture on one side and culture on the other, and I heard stories of extreme abuse with her growing up, not at her, but with the war, right? She grew up during martial law, where the Japanese had the Filipinos under martial law, and the Americans did come in and save them. Of course, they didn't do all good things, but it's sort of watching her shift and not focus on that, but know the history is important to me to say, like, what are we doing now? How are we working with our own regulation? And some of the most gruesome things I've heard from some of my clients are from clients from Northern Ireland, and we don't. So I want to say that because there's so much trauma in all forms. And
it is systemic.
It's systemic
for
and
everyone.
It sucks. And at the end of the day, what is the individual doing to heal their own wounds, and what is your ancestry asking you to heal, and focus on you and your immediate family system. It really is, I can't say that enough. And then everybody we become more neutral with each other, more in equanimity with our fellow humans. So no, we do not specifically have sections on this. We work with the biology, we work with the shock trauma, we work with the early trauma, the developmental trauma, and all those elements within.
Chronic stress and strain. Yeah, absolutely.
There's been a few questions asking about different courses. Someone asked about the MELT method. Someone's asking about Amy's course, Amy Apigian. I know Amy, we're friends, we're colleagues. At the end of the day, like, there's so many things out there, and I know colleagues like Amy, they suggest my work. Other people who are trauma practitioners suggest my work. You have to feel in your own system. This comes back to the individual. Are you being drawn to study a bit more with myself and my team? Maybe it's not through SBSM. Maybe it's through just getting into some free resources, getting into the 21 days. The reason we're really talking about SmartBody SmartMind is we're in registration right now. And we're only in registration for 2 times a year. And that first time is now until the 22nd of February. So there's still all this week and most of next week. Thursday is the final day to get in. So we're at time, we're at 90 minutes. I know there's a lot of other questions, but what I will recommend, if we didn't get to your question specifically, do these 2 things. Type into Google, YouTube, the question, the keywords, and my name. I have over 450 videos on YouTube and so many long form lectures where we have timestamps. Everything from OCD to ADD to migraine headaches to someone asked about celiacs, like all these things. So see if you can find something there. If nothing is there, go to our FAQ section on the SmartBody SmartMind registration page. There are 19 questions that are answered there. Lots of information. Like, you could just read that and that would be learning in itself, even if you don't have a question. And then thirdly, if you still can't find your question answered, just email support, our support team, support@irenelyon.com, and we're doing our best to get to all the questions this week. I will be doing another panel with parents on Friday. Seth will be doing a panel with the dudes on Thursday, a men's panel. We've never done that, and I might crash the panel and hang out.
No way.
We need more guys. We need more men to do this work.
Yes, we do.
And women, everybody, but yeah, the guys, they need help too. And then we'll do a final Q&A early next week, and I'll be on Instagram and other channels doing my best to answer questions. At the end of the day, this comes down to you and your impulse and your choice and using your free will to shift and choose what you want to do, how you want to approach your healing. I have just seen so many stories, so many amazing anecdotes to what happens when we get this deep level of healing on board, that it can sometimes seem almost too good to be true. And we've been living in this world up until now where regulation has not been the norm. So it seems strange when something can shift all these things. But this is what our body wants. It wants to be in regulation. It does not want to be in dysregulation. At the core biological level, the system does not want to be in dysregulation, but our systems are really good at keeping us that way. So a bigger macro piece to this is the more people who get this level of regulation on board, the more we crack the system, the more we start to push to a different kind of humanity. The earth will be fine eventually, no matter what, right? It's us that we need to work on. So those are sort of my final words. Do you have anything to add, Seth, as we end?
Well, just knowing that, our systems have an organic trend towards homeostasis. They, like Irene said, they don't want to be in dysregulation. And yeah, the systems of the world kind of at this point, and for many years, hundreds of years, have depended on people being in survival in order to function. If everyone was regulated, the world would not be as it is, because you can't do a lot of the things that this various systems ask of you without being in survival mode. So this is how we change the world. This is how we shift humanity and evolve. is by each person learning to connect to the natural goodness that's inside of them at that physiological level. That's what the system wants. And so when we start to give it what it wants and support that organic trend towards coherence, towards homeostasis, rather than dysregulation, it just drinks it up like water. And that's why it's so effective. It's supporting what wants to happen. So yeah, if you feel drawn, if you feel like you want to learn from us and get into this work, let that be your guide, you know? Yeah. We certainly would be happy to have you. And yeah.
Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Rebecca and Bonnie, for being in the chat. I do apologize for the ads. That was new for us. So hang in there. And like I said, we'll be doing more panels this week. We'll do another Q&A next week. So much information is on the website, so be sure to check that out. And if you do have a question, don't be shy. Just send us an email. We get to all of the emails. Do not send me a DM on Instagram or Facebook. That is not the way to reach us. Email is the best way. Thank you, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks all.
Bye.